Okay, we're going to call the meeting. The Village of Saybird respectfully acknowledges that we are on the land we're gathered on is the unceded territory of the Comox First Nations, the traditional keepers of this land. Call the meeting to order. Excuse me. Public input. Maximum 2 minutes per speaker, 15-minute total. Public input is for the purpose of permitting people in the gallery to provide feedback and shall no longer be than 15 minutes, unless approved by the majority of council. Each speaker will provide a respectful comment on any topic they deem appropriate, not necessarily on the topics on the agenda of the meeting. Each speaker may not speak longer than 2 minutes. They have a second opportunity if time permits. Each speaker must not be allowed to speak regarding a bylaw in respect of which a public hearing has been held. For the record, you'd state your name and address. Nobody online? Right. Introduction of late items. We have a late item staff report. It'll go under F. After permissive tax exemption. Everybody's got that. Approval of agenda. With the agenda, everybody's good with the agenda? Councillor Burchett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the mayor to the CAO, I would like some motions added to this evening's agenda that I already gave him, and I believe that at least one of them should be on tonight.
Okay, refer to staff.
So council, I have corresponded with Councillor Burchett regarding this matter and indicated that staff is preparing to provide council with information at the June 20th council meeting. That's the time when staff will be able to report fulsomely, help facilitate a discussion fulsomely on the topic. If that's not to the satisfaction of council, then I would make a suggestion that we move in camera for further discussion.
Councillor Burchett?
Yeah, just curious through the mayor to the CEO, where in the bylaws do you have the power to omit council business if it is not legal or in camera?
I'm not suggesting that we omit business. I'm suggesting that staff has provided information that based on the work that I'm doing and the information that I've received, that staff will be able to provide further, more fulsome, most accurate information at the June 20th council meeting. It's just for the benefit of council. I'm not trying to omit anything. I'm just trying to provide the most fulsome information to council. Any further discussion on this tonight, I would not be able to fulsomely advise council as I would like to as your administrator.
Councillor Burchett?
Through the mayor to the CEO. The first item I think should be on the agenda. Like I said, it's not in camera and it has nothing to do with legal. And I think council should vote on
Point
this.
of order has been called. Go ahead and say your point of order, please.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our next step is for the council to take a vote based on the response from the CAO as to whether we are in agreement with June 20th being a reasonable time to receive information relative to what Councillor Burchett has proposed.
Would you like to make a motion on that, Councillor Tinsley?
I move that we take a vote on waiting until June 20th as advised by the CAO.
Right. All in. Second. I'll second it. Discussion. Councillor Burchett?
the topic that needs to be discussed and voted on my motion is not in camera or legal, and that one item should be voted on now by council and not all of the items removed for further agenda on the 20th.
Any further discussion? Counselor Tinsley?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a point of order is that we are discussing the question of the information being provided on June 20th. We are not discussing different aspects.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So all in favor of waiting until the 20th? Correct, as advised by the CAO? No, sorry, I thought you spoke. Sorry.
I believe when the vote is called that there's no more further discussion and the vote happens. Thank you.
Okay, so all in favor on waiting till the 20th as the CAO is provided? Opposed? Okay, motion is defeated. We will go in camera. Or sorry, go ahead, refer to staff.
So I would suggest that council go in camera to discuss this further under section N, the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under the provision of this subsection.
Thank you. So we need a motion to go in camera. Is that, sorry, sorry, CAO, your microphone? Thank you. Okay, so we had a motion.
I move that we go into camera following this meeting.
We would be doing it right now.
Okay, out of respect to our speakers of who we have a number, I suggest that in consideration to those professionals that we address this after and
Okay.
move their item up on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Discussion? Councillor Bichette?
The item I'm trying to talk about is not in camera or legal, and it's separate from 4 different motions, so I don't understand why I'm being silenced. I think it's unprofessional and against your
Okay,
code of
thank you.
conduct.
That's- Excuse me. CAO? Oh, your microphone, Councillor Tinsley?
Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So respectfully, Councillor Burchett indicated that it was in reference to the motions that he had provided me earlier. And I can provide some insight in camera further to those motions, why they would not be considered as part of a regular council meeting. Thank you.
Correct, which has already been established. Okay, so to move the in-camera meeting to the end of the meeting, we have a first, we had a second, we had discussion. All in favor? Opposed? 2 opposed, noted. In camera will be at the end of the meeting. So please make sure you write. Okay. So that the agenda for the regular council meeting for June 6, 2023 be approved as amended.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Second,
I'll second that.
thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing 1 opposed? Carried. Minutes of previous meeting. The minutes of the regular council meeting that was held on May 16th, 2023 be adopted.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? Carried. Petition and delegations? None. Correspondence? We have A through G. Does anybody want pulled? Councillor Tinsley?
So just a point of order question. I thought we'd voted to move the presenter up, or no, we moved.
No.
Correct. I apologize. So
Nope.
to the point of pulling, I would request item 7D and 7E be pulled.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Paulson?
I would also request those two to be pulled as well as H.
Okay. So from items A, B, C, F, and G be received. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I just have a question about A, the Island Health Report on wildfire smoke, and would like to request that it be posted on the Village of Sayward website so that the information is shared throughout the community.
Okay. Staff, you can make that happen, correct? Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? None that's received. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. So Councillor Tinsley will go to D. Of the correspondence, please.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that there's two calls for action in the two items. The first one being a request for some money in support of the program that they're offering on the National Indigenous Peoples Day. And well, maybe I should just speak to that one first. That's in the first item, the item D, I think it is. So I believe we need to discuss that and decide if we're going to contribute. Thank you.
Councillor Gilkin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councillor Tinsley's point, I was just looking at some of the things that they were asking for support, and it says supplying event signage or stage equipment, and I was just asking if that is signage to the event or what's the general context of that.
I would assume that is promoting the event itself, so we would have to pay for the signage and.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to speak to the request for support and note that it is for a monetary amount contribution or an in-kind amount. And I do have a council report in for the June 20th agenda asking for policy bylaw, procedure policy bylaw on a written policy on how we handle requests for money or in kind. And to that end, I would like to suggest that we offer an in-kind donation.
And which in-kind donation would that be, Councillor
I
Paulson?
think that's, I think
That you
that,
would suggest.
well, there's several that we could choose from. I would suggest that it is donating a door prize.
Okay, Councillor Gilkin, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was, are we able to post that, like, on the village website to advertise that? Around Sayward, on the website or Facebook or whatnot?
That's a letter to council. I think we'd have to get permission from them in order to post that. CAO.
I think what Councillor, Mr. Mayor, I think what Councillor Gilkin is referring to one of the bullet items that suggests that advertising it on our village website is one of the in-kind considerations.
Sure. I don't see a problem with that. Anybody on council see an issue with that? No? Okay, so staff will do that with the other point. Okay, is there anything else? CAO.
If am I hearing correctly that you want to provide the link on the website or promotion of the event on the website and a door prize?
That's what's been suggested, yes.
Can you just provide some details to staff around the door prize? What you've got in mind, if one of council's going to purchase it, perhaps a monetary limit, et cetera?
Anybody? Councillor Tinsley?
Can I suggest that maybe Councillor Paulson has an idea because she was suggesting in kind, so. But I do believe that whatever it is, we have to place a dollar value on it, whether we're paying for something or whether we have something here. So
Right.
perhaps Councillor Paulson has a suggestion. I'm not sure.
Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would prefer to defer it to staff to make the purchase, and I would suggest a $200 limit.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion on that?
Thank you. I'll make a motion to provide a $200 limit on providing an in-kind door prize to the Comox First Nations celebration on Wednesday, June 21st, and that staff be tasked with selecting the gift.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Did you? Nope. Okay. All in favor? There you go. Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Okay, and the next item was E, Councillor Tinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The action item on item E is RSVPing as to whether the mayor or any of the council or council people will be attending or not by June 9th. So I believe we have to decide that and respond with due etiquette by that date.
Council, is there anyone here that is would like to go? Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't remember who is the Comox First Nation on the Comox First Nations committee, but I would like to recommend that person attend.
I don't believe we have a Comox First Nations committee. This term, we don't have one.
Who's the Comox First Nations representative?
We don't have one. That was not established because there was the only groups that were established were active, and that didn't appear on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gilkin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would love to attend if my schedule works. I can put it in my schedule now and get back to.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bichette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to attend as well. Again, it comes down to a working schedule, but I'll put my name on there for June 21st.
Okay, we're going to need confirmation from both of you by the end of the week is fine? Is that time? Is that enough time?
It says on, thank you, Mr. Mayor, it says RSV by June 9th to Catherine Frank.
So that won't be enough time. That'll be Friday already. So please confirm with staff by no later than Thursday, the 8th. Okay, so we don't need a motion for them to attend, do we?
No, other than to say, can you please email CFO Clark on Thursday,
Okay,
please?
there you go. Thank you. Okay, and the next one to be pulled was H. Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to speak to this because the Strathcona Community Health Network is actively seeking new members, and due to a complicated and complex thing that happened at the very beginning of my first appointment or election to council, I was asked by the previous CAO to attend the meetings. And I have been attending them from that time, from November of 2021 regularly. And I would like to ask permission from council to register myself to be a member on this community network, as a representative from the village of Sayward.
Anyone on council want to volunteer as well? No. Everybody's okay with Councillor Paulson being the representative on this committee? Very well. Do we need a motion on that? No? Okay. Councillor Paulson?
I understood that we did need a motion on this because there was no motion at the first time when I was asked to attend the meeting, and so it wasn't documented as a
Official
council-
committee?
as an official council committee.
CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a point of clarification, my understanding of this is that this is a news release out to the public requesting for the public to submit an expression of interest in becoming a member. So this isn't, it's a little bit different than what we do receive from time to time, asking for a municipal appointee that's, for lack of a better term, assured of being part of the committee. My understanding of this is that it's a request for members to nominate themselves, and that there's going to be consideration of the members that submit their expression of interest, and then they'll select them from there. I don't see anywhere in here where we're being asked to submit on behalf of the village of Sayward, just for distinction. If Councillor Paulson, of course, could attend as a representative, but this doesn't have to be an appointment by council to attend, to be an appointee to this. It's a submission of interest, effectively.
Okay, so effectively you wouldn't be representing council, you'd be representing yourself in the area.
So further to that, the meetings that I've been attending are related to the Strathcona Food Hub, of which there are about 16 spokes to this wheel. And when I was asked to attend these meetings, it was to represent Sayward. And so I understand that it's for public to be step up and say, but this is to represent the Sayward community food table that was established almost a year ago. And I've been actively involved in that, except for a few months when I was on leave. So that's what I'm asking, to represent the village at this committee. And I can bring that back, but I just feel that at the beginning, after I'd attended about a year's worth of meetings, I was told that I wasn't an official representative from the village because it hadn't passed through council. So that's what I'm trying to establish now, that the Sayward Community Food Table will be have a member on their board or organization that represents the village, and we can promote food security and education around all of that in our community on behalf of the village, and show support for that group.
Thank you. CEO, and then Councillor Chesley.
Thank you. I think I have a pretty clear understanding of what Councillor Burchett's referring to, and I can inform council that
Councillor Paulson?
Councillor Paulson, thank you. I have seen correspondence from a couple of CAOs previous to me where the municipality was emailed and all the municipalities in British Columbia were emailed, and an expression and an appointee was requested for the food hub. And at that time, Councillor Paulson was appointed or was authorized to become the appointee for the food hub on behalf of the village. And she, of course, has been doing that. If I understand Councillor Paulson correctly in relation to this matter, you're suggesting that as the food hub representative, you could participate, these meetings? Is that what I hear you saying? You're already part of the food hub and that, right, and that you would attend these meetings as a representative of the food hub, which in part you're attending as a representative of the village of Sayward. Yeah, it still is an expression of interest. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they're picking. I mean, they're saying like the committee will consist of 7 to 12 members, voting members. So I'm not sure if they're going through an application process or what, but please keep us updated. Okay. So recommend resolution that correspondence D, E, and H be received.
Move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Council reports, none. Reports of committees, none. Mayor report, none. Unfinished business, none. Staff reports, summer water restrictions. We'll start off with the first two, because that's pretty standard for us. So that council received the summer water restriction staff report for information and discussion, and that the staff be directed to implement water restrictions as outlined in the staff report effective June 15th, 2023. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Oh, second,
I'll second that.
discussion. Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a point of clarification, I would like to question number 1 on page 34 under the water regulations, where it says that no watering between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And I think that needs to be more specific, because I can see sprinklers going from 4 in the afternoon until 10 a.m. I think I hope that the wording could be changed, that the watering is between 6 and 10 a.m. and 6 and 10 p.m. rather than through the whole night, as I believe they have been in the past. So just to not run into any difficulties, I think that would be a good plan. And also, I would like to ask whether we could have signage posted at the entrance to Sayward and at that we have water restrictions are in force, so that the public is aware, because there's people that say they're not on the website or the internet, and there's no board at the post office anymore. So in order to make everybody aware, if it's posted where the snowplow signs are posted, then everybody would be, it would be a visual reminder and everybody would be aware.
Would it be sufficient to have it in the newsletter to save cost, or you don't think so? Because the newsletter, regardless if you're on the internet.
There's people that don't accept garbage mail, and the newsletter is unfortunately classified as garbage mail.
Okay. So council, what were the times that you mention, please?
6 to 10 a.m. and 6 to 10 p.m. on the appropriate dates for,
6 to 10 AM and 6 to 10 PM on the assigned dates for odd and even houses.
Counselor Tinsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only question, I agree with Councillor Paulson's recommendation. However, I believe, and I'll, through the mayor to the CAO, I believe that would involve a bylaw amendment, or am I wrong?
No. My only comment is that we don't have much capacity to be policing the restrictions.
Counselor Tinsley?
Great, thank you for that clarification. That's good to hear that we don't have to amend the bylaw. I think that although we, per the CIO's point, that we can't police necessarily, I think the councillor's suggestion is very helpful in that it makes it very clear within the information provided to the public of those hours, and we would hope people would respect them.
And what about signage?
Oh, so on the separate topic of signage, my discussion point would be that I feel through the web and the current uses, based on cost savings, I would suggest that we defer that as a great idea, but possibly for another year. Thank you.
Okay. So we need to go to a motion on that? Or just council direction? There's a motion on the table. That's correct. So we'll do we'll do an amendment, a friendly amendment to the motion to change the time between 6 and 10 a.m. and 6 and 10 p.m. and remain with our current advertising. Is the amendment? So on the amendment motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Councillor Paulson? Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. And the next is that staff be directed to research and or review the best practices and the type of properties to be included in the summer water restrictions and report back with possible options. Motion, please.
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. There we go. They had to wait all this time. Sewer and water capacity study. To turn it over to the CAO for introductions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mayor and Council. So we've got a two-phased approach to this evening. We have John and Gabrielle from McElhaney out of the Campbell River office, who are going to provide you a PowerPoint or make a presentation through PowerPoint around the water and sanitary studies. And then following that, I'll introduce approving officer Manson.
The floor is yours.
John. This is Gabby. She is an EIT in our office in Campbell River. So it's great to meet this council for the first time. I think it's been a few years, maybe pre-COVID when I was here last, so. Yeah, I think. Let me know if I'm like using or reusing some technical jargon and just be like, it's, obviously, and if there's
Will do.
questions as we're going through, like, yeah, please just let me know. The main thing is that, hopefully we answer all your questions.
No problem.
Yeah, so I think about a year ago, we were, engaged to do the sanitary and water system analysis. And so this is just the, final report, and just a summary of the final report and the conclusions and recommendations.
Sorry, technical issues.
That's okay.
There we go. Sorry, we're just gonna have John Hanson here. Because they need. I try to move them around.
Yeah,
Oh, there we go.
yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, I won't spend too much time on this, but you know, this is just, obviously you guys know that there's a weir, the water is drawn from Newcastle Creek. You guys have a beautiful new water treatment plant up there that pumps water up into the reservoir. Yeah, we've got some maximum day demands and what have you. There's approximately 6.7 kilometers of water main in Sayward, and almost 50% of that water main is asbestos concrete. So of course, in any water system these days, the asbestos concrete is the stuff that, you know, we know eventually it's gonna fail. Next, please. Okay, so for both the water and the sanitary analysis, we looked at the existing population. So what was the capacity based on people who live here today, as well as future development based on the draft zoning bylaw or the draft OCP. Just that OCP is still draft, right?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, and so this just shows the existing zoning on the left, the official community plan zoning on the right. And as you know, the major difference being the comprehensive development zone to the north has been added in to the OCP. Okay, so when we're doing an analysis of the water system, we look at two scenarios. One scenario is if we have a fire, is there, you know, do you have enough water to fight the fire and yet make sure there's enough pressure in the system that people can still turn their taps on? Maybe they don't get a, you know, a ton of water out. So that's one scenario. And the second is, you know, the peak hour demand when everyone's watching Game 7 of the Canucks, if they ever make it there, you know, and at intermission and all the toilets flush, are you going to have a residual pressure of 40 PSI? So you're not, you know, getting big pressure drop. So those are the two scenarios that we look at. And when it comes to fire flows, you can see some values there, like single family is obviously much less than industrial. So these are in obviously downtown, we, you know, look at a single family, we look at 60 liters per second, industrial is 225. So there's a big variation between those. So yeah, when we ran this, we did find that the commercial industrial zones at the north end were deficient. So I think you get about 100 liters per second down by the dock, and it should be 150. And then same with the commercial and industrial zones at the south end. Because it's industrial, it should be 225, and I think you get around 120 right now. So there's definitely some deficiencies for the commercial and industrial zones of the north and south ends of town.
May I ask what causes that?
Well, the big thing is there's only one 6-inch pipe running all the way out to, you know, out to the dock on the north. So like I would know as an engineer and sizing this stuff, that if we wanted 150 liters per second, we should have probably like a 250 millimeter pipe that's looped all the way around. You just get so much friction loss, all that water screaming through that little pipe. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's basically, it's the water main sizing, like, yeah, that's the big thing.
Thank you.
And this is very typical, right? Like of, as these places develop, it's like, oh, let's put this over here, but they got a little water main. So, yeah, next please. Okay, another thing that we look at for deficiencies is just the maximum velocity in the pipe. So during the fire flow, how fast is the water moving? This is more for if we're designing new systems. We don't like this, but I think, you know, what's important to understand is, you know, for instance, Sayward Road at the log sort, you get 7.2 meters per second. So, you know, if you have a nice new PVC pipe, not such an issue. But we've done hydrant testing before where we see asbestos strands coming out of the hydrant. So that's, you know, that's when the velocities are, when they get way up there, that they can, especially with asbestos pipe, cause some issues. Okay, the treatment plant, I'll start at the third bullet point there. So I'm assuming you guys are probably pretty familiar with all this stuff, but as you know, there's problems with the screener right now, and you're getting needles in the treatment process, which then where Tony has to take the system offline and the water system offline and all this stuff. So that's definitely an issue. Because you have one reservoir, you can't take it offline to clean it without, like right now, I think you can't because the bypass doesn't have chlorination on it. So that is a concern. The fire flow storage, again, you know, there's enough fire flow storage for like residential and multifamily, but once you start getting to commercial and industrial and those big fire flows, then that reservoir is not sized for that. So those are, you know, all reasons why a second reservoir would be beneficial. And the last thing, and this is like, again, a couple of years ago when I was here, we talked about this as final bullet point, inadequate flow monitoring. So right now, the flows coming into or out of the treatment plant and into the reservoir are monitored. But Tony has to go there and manually write down the, you know, what's the volume every day that went through there. Unfortunately, that's the water into the reservoir, and water in doesn't necessarily mean water out. So we do not have a good feel of what the actual flows are leaving the reservoir. And that's always been, yeah, a bit of a concern in understanding the data that we have. And we could talk more about that. So, and that was the first recommendation here, is to, you know, to really understand what the peak flows in the water system are, would be to add a flow meter with monitoring capability at the reservoir outlet. And what I'm saying there is just something that records data on 10-minute intervals as opposed to Tony once a day, you know, so we could really, you get an idea of what your peak hour flows are at, you know, what happened during that Canucks game, you know, what you get good data that way. And then another major water user is the log sort. And yeah, I think everyone knows that. And there is a water meter there, but it's also doesn't have the ability to do automatic recording. So Tony would have to go there a couple times a day, write it down. So this is, as we're talking about how much water you guys use, what are peak flows, accommodating future development, these would really help answer those questions. Some more recommendations are just standard, like water meters that people put in new homes. Just get them to either put in the full water meter or just a box. So you guys later go, you know, in 30 years, or, you know, I don't know when you're going to monitor, you can just drop the meter in there. So that's, you know, that's pretty standard now across most municipalities. We just talked about, you know, getting some hydrant testing so we can get a better idea of what actual flows are. So for this water model, we had a couple hydrant tests. So, because we want to make sure our computer model matches up with real life. So this would just help give some more certainty that, you know, I telling you the flow at the end of the road is 110. Yes, we confirm that in the field kind of thing, or in the south area town. Yeah, and then, yeah, just the fourth bullet point there, or the fifth, the explore using booster pumps or upsizing water pipes to increase available flow. So yeah, because of those deficient flows at both ends. So, you know, in future, as development progresses, it would be good to explore, like, you know, upgrading down to the marina and looping it back or something like that. Yeah, and again, and then you could look at upsizing the water pipes, where the velocities are really high, like immediate, like sooner than later for the asbestos concrete sections, because those are the ones that are more of an issue.
You mentioned it was 47% where the concrete asbestos.
Yes.
How did you determine that?
Just in the
And-
record drawings we had.
Just for the record drawings? And is that part, replacing that, is that part of that $14 million quote?
Thankfully it is, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, I
just,
hope so.
just wanted to
Yeah,
check.
yeah, no. Good, I'm glad you read that before, because I was worried about telling you that. All right, next, please. So yeah, and then the water plant, you know, there was a grant submitted last year, I think it was unsuccessful, for twinning the reservoir, upgrading that strainer, because what should go in there is a strainer that it starts to feel a pressure drop. It's a little bit finer, so the needles don't get into the plant, and as it plugs up, it feels the pressure drop and it stops and flushes itself out and then continues operating, as opposed to Tony taking it apart and cleaning a screen. And
That was a
What have you?
6-inch automatic.
yeah, that's right, yeah. Exactly. And then this came up from when we were there with Tony, because you know, he's using fluoridation and stuff, so there's not much for an eye wash station in that building, so that's what that third bullet is. The next one is when he, like right now, because he's getting needles in the plant, he needs to flush the treatment system out, and then it goes, there's a lagoon just downhill, or a hole in the ground just downhill of the water treatment plant. And right now, he has to pump that water out and take it somewhere. So part of the grant and what the recommendations were to pipe that into the sanitary sewer, just to limit the costs of always having to truck the water out and get rid of it. And then, you know, like supply of spare parts and equipment. And then again, the water metering at the reservoir and the recording at the log source. So all that, I'm sure, was very interesting.
It was.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so again, like when we're doing this, we're looking at, and please, I hope I don't, because I lose myself when I talk about this stuff sometimes. So like when we're modeling a system, like fire flows are given to us by the master municipal contract document. Well, same with if we're going, okay, how much does the average household use? There's published numbers in there that, and that's what we used, and we tried to line them up with the data in hand. So there was a few days, we got data from 2020, and there was a few days in 2020 that had really, really high water use. So like one day in August of 2020, the average flow all day was almost 18 liters a second. And your plant produces 20 liters a second. So, and this has been the day that has been the concern for, yeah, because it's like, okay, we only, you know, we have limited data. And then we looked at the second day and it was 16.26 liters per second over a 24-hour period, basically. And again, if your plant's producing 20, then you know, there's a little buffer. And then if you look at the average maximum day demand, like over the whole year, it's 13.54. So it's much more acceptable. And, you know, I think what's really important to remember is in all this, you have a reservoir that's full of water. So if for a day, even you got a bunch of development, it increased greater than your plant could produce, all that effectively happens is your reservoir drops a little bit until it can recover. And then we start talking about, well, what's the statistics of having that flow on that day and a fire? And then there was a bunch of questions around why is that number so high of that 18 liters a second? It's, yeah, significantly higher. So there's all these things that were, you know, and that's part of the recommendation for the flow monitoring. So we can really go, okay, this is what you used in the summer. You know, this was your peak day. So, yeah, I don't know. Is there any questions about that?
Sorry. You'll have to wait till question period. It's strictly for council on the presentation. Sorry, Mike.
So, oh, sorry. Thank you. So the intent of this slide was to try to let council know, like, on that one day in 2020, when that flow was 18 liters per second per day, how many more single family houses could you have added to the system? Because, you know, obviously the concern is, can we accommodate development? Can we not accommodate development? So I took those two highest days and, you know, because the plant produces 20, we're at 17.99. You have an excess of 2 liters per second, which is an equivalent of 77 houses. And then in July, the high number in July is the equivalent of 144 houses. So that was the intent of this chart, is just to kind of show, you know, on that one really, really high day. You know, where would we have been over capacity and we start drawing down the reservoir? Okay. Okay, so this is, we just, you know, we looked at, you know, the linear meters of water main. We just did one price of $1,250. So that includes all the paving, everything. Upgrades to the treatment plant that we discussed, a new reservoir, as well as the, okay, there's a typo in that, but as well as the water meter for the water leaving the reservoir and the monitoring for the water going into the log sort. So basically, for about $15,000, you could put a water meter and something to read the data leaving the reservoir. And I think that would give, yeah, a lot of surety as to these questions. And then the rest of the money was to upgrade the other the other water meters, sorry, at the log sort and potentially the campground. The campground's less important because it, you know, we know the log sort uses a lot of water, where, you know, the campground's probably not nearly as much. So
Log sort 69% of our consumption.
what's that?
Log sort 69% of our consumption.
Yeah. Yeah, like, yeah, when we evaluated these numbers, like, there's no way you should use 18 liters a second in a day. Like, there's no way. And it was the only explanation that made any sense came from Tony, and it's when they leave for the weekend and leave the sprinklers on and what have you. They just, you know, come in the morning and he's like, what is going on here? And then he'll go down there. So that's been anecdotally what's been relayed to us. Yeah.
You gonna tell us what the typo was? There's a whole bunch of $1 million numbers in there. Is there, is there a?
No.
You gonna tell us which one is the typo?
The typo is 71,000 instead of 75. Yes, yeah.
So only 15,000 to put on a water meter that reads.
Yes.
Only 15.
Well, it's all relative, yeah. It's
My question is.
My question is, why are we using treated water at the log sort? What would be the cost of putting in a water system separate from our treatment plant to service the log sort? And it gets more complicated. How many single home dwellings then could be increased? Numbers could be increased by taking the log sort off the treatment plant and adding how many homes that we could supply water to that is treated.
Yeah.
It seems like it's just a phenomenal expense to me, and it doesn't make sense in my mind.
Absolutely. I'm totally with you. Yeah, yeah, in terms of, I'm guessing the cost of them would be, would be fairly expensive. I mean, I've thought other things that are even less intrusive than that, like a timer. So it can't be left on over the weekend, yeah, stuff like that. In terms of numbers of homes, I don't know if you could go back a few slides, right there. So this shows, for instance, right, in 2021, with your average day flow of 13.54, that's 250 more homes. So, that's kind of in an order of magnitude of what, well,
Sorry, 250 more?
250 additional homes, and that's that average day demand in, for 2021. Because when we look at it over a year, those peak periods, they get stretched out, so they don't have as much impact over like one day.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of gives you an order of magnitude, 250 more homes.
Oops, CAO.
Interesting, Councillor Paulson. I guess my thought is that using our current reservoir, whether the water was treated or not, John, it's still the same water. So if you were to provide water from the reservoir to the log sort that wasn't treated, it's still from the reservoir. So it wouldn't necessarily provide more opportunity for more homes. You're still using the same pool of water to provide notwithstanding the incredible savings for not treating the water. But I think to hit Councillor Paulson's idea, you'd have to actually draw the water from a separate location in order to increase the amount of homes, no? Do you follow me?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You would have to, right now, water comes from the weir in a nice big pipe and goes into that screen. And there's an old shack up there. You'd have to, one solution could be to grab water and pipe raw water down there. So, which is obviously cost because you're installing water main from there. Down. But yeah, I mean,
What about a reverse osmosis system down at the sort?
yeah, it's all money. I mean, but
How expensive would that be compared to a reservoir? And the piping, wouldn't that be less expensive?
the challenge with the reservoir, ideally, when you build your plant, there would have been two. Because that gives you the flexibility to take one offline. When the plant goes down, it gives you more time to breathe, your poor operation guys in the rain and Sunday night in the winter. So, yeah, generally, everywhere has two tanks, basically. But I think it was just, at that time, it was just the available grant money. And one got built. So up there, all the plumbing's there for the second one. That tank needs to be erected.
Cute. Any questions? Nope.
Now, Gabby.
Welcome to the sanitary network now.
Sorry, just a little closer to the mic.
I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it. So gravity mains and force mains collect all your sanitary, pump stations help get it all to your lagoon, provides treatment, where it's then outfall and calcivate. So like your water network, about half is asbestos cement pipe. John's touched on why there's issues with that already. Move on to the next slide. So again, very similar to the water, we looked at two scenarios for the sanitary. So say we're the population as it is today, and then also with some future development based on the zoning. So good news, no major deficiencies in your sanitary network. There's no capacity or surcharging in your pipe network. So what we did find was some minor geometric deficiencies, so i.e. pipe size, and then poorly graded. So you don't have enough grade. Sometimes you get solids that settle out too quickly. And then you can also get fat, oil, and grease that builds up and reduces the capacity of your pipe over time. And then again, aging AC pipes, you're probably getting near the end of their lifespan, might have to start replacing more. And then finally, in 2020, North Island Pumps completed inspections on your lift stations. And they found that there's some maintenance that needs to be done regarding electrical and then the mechanical pumps themselves. Next slide. So our recommendations for your sanitary network are to monitor and flush your poorly graded sewers. Just make sure that anything that settles out is removed. And then, as you can, to upgrade your AC pipes to PVC as you have funding streams that come available. And then when you are upgrading them, we recommend a minimum diameter of 200 millimeters, fairly standard now. And then if possible, implement some flow monitoring. So again, we have our modeling results, but it's really good to have some field data to confirm it. And then next is that you continue to monitor your lagoon to ensure compliance with WSCR regulations. That's just wastewater sanitary effluent regulations. So just making sure you're treating your sanitary waste before it goes up to the tank. And then last is to repair the lift stations.
I thought we just put new lift stations in. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, we put generators, the lift stations, but
So, okay, thank you.
So with no major deficiencies in your sanitary system, we wanted to more so provide some unit costs just to help with budgeting going forward. Because there are likely going to be some AC pipes that are going to crack and you're going to want to replace. So the quantities there are your entire system. That's why it's a huge cost. So it's more so, you know, within the next year, you have a budget of this amount. You can figure out, okay, we can do this linear meters. We can do this many manholes with that. And then last on there is the lift station repairs. That was an estimate based on those North Island inspections. And then typical contingency and allowances. And that wraps it up. Are there any questions?
Councilor Tinsley?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question, like some of the recommendation around 77, which is the low end of the wide range of potential houses now. When you look at that, was there any consideration to how quickly the environment is changing relative to and you know, potential increased fires in the future, and also potential lack of water, reduced water supply actually. So that was one factor, and then the other factor was relative to the current number of vacant lots that are sitting in the village already, don't need any extra permission, shall we say, to build on them. And also the fact that the village technically, anyone could put a basement suite in, which it potentially doubles the capacity used in the house. Were those factors looked at when you came up with the 77 number, just kind of like as a guide? sorry, just to add to it, just to clarify, so that's great. So what I'm hearing then, if we have a capacity for the recommended 77, we should actually be subtracting from that the number of vacant, ready-to-go lots from that number. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Bichette?
Yeah, just a comment on, thank you, Mr. Mayor, just a comment on Councillor Tinsley's second question. Upon reading the report myself, it was clearly stated that there's 15 houses that you accommodated for people that were not living in more or less vacation homes in Sayward. So that was clear in the report. So if that clarifies that for you.
Thank you, Councillor Bichette. No, the clarification was around actually vacant lots, bare land lots that could be built on now. And then the second part of that were related to that any home could potentially be doubled in capacity if people put in basement suites. So I'm just wanting to ensure we're looking at those numbers relative to that 77 number. Certainly the number you're talking about with homes that are seasonal, shall we say, should be considered. They would be an add, shall we speak, I would suggest. So if the number is 15, then approximately an add back would be 7, right? About half capacity, right? But thank you.
Councillor Gilkin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question. I believe I was possibly in the OCP about kind of a rough estimate on the asbestos pipes. How long year-wise before real breakdown happens? Like terrible breakdown.
Typical lifespan for AC is between 50 and 70. So we're into that, you know, the lower range now. Yeah, sorry. It's a concern.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you both coming out. Nice to meet you. Okay, so recommended resolutions. Sorry, did somebody else?
So
Oh,
we're
Mr.
gonna-
Manson, you had something to add?
We're going to have a presentation from Mr. Manson with respect to his staff report.
Yep, there we go.
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Mayor. Can you hear us, John?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. You weren't answering. I was, oh, that's not good. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I don't want to repeat everything that you've just had. John gave a good presentation, and Gabby also as well. Her report's a lot better because she had a lot better news than John had, unfortunately, but that was the luck of the draw, I think. Anyways, I'd like to go through the two studies from my perspective, and I'm putting on a sort of a development hat on this, sort of as your approving officer, to talk about the implications of the two report generally on development in the community. Development could be, as already mentioned, could be building permits on an empty lot. It could be, you know, expanding a house, could be a subdivision application under current zoning, or it could be a rezoning to a higher density. So all those kinds of development all contribute to changing density. So I provided you a report. It's in your agenda package. I'm just going to work my way through it and just maybe just summarize the what I find are the important points. So I think the first item is that these are my focus, particularly on looking at these as more of a capacity focus and less on asset management. And it's not to say that asset management it isn't important, and you've had questions already about the AC pipes and those kinds of things. Generally speaking, you don't normally ask developers to go and upgrade AC pipes to put new ones in because you don't like the standard of the old pipes, but you do often ask developers to put in a bigger pipe if the pipe that's there isn't big enough to provide for the development. So there is a bit of a difference there. If you're going to replace your AC pipes, for example, with the newer PVC pipes or newer types of pipes, typically paid for by the utility itself. In other words, your taxpayer that's paying into your utility. So a bit of a difference there between who's paying for these necessary upgrades. And certainly there's a blend, you know, if you need a new reservoir, if you need fire protection, the community can benefit from that, and also developers can benefit from it. So that's often a case where you'll use a financing tool like a development cost charge bylaw, where developers pay a portion of those trunk costs, and the community will often pay a portion of them as well. Just a note on the OCP, I think it was mentioned, your new OCP is in progress. I believe you've had your first reading already. And I think I'd just like to make a comment that from the point of view, at least from my opinion, the point of view of these studies, from the point of view of the focus of these studies and the modeling that was done, the new OCP is not significantly different than the old. The project to the north, the rezoning to the north was already anticipated in the old OCP. So I don't think there's any need to go back and readjust these studies if and when the new OCP gets passed, just as a note. I'm going to go the other way around. I'm going to start with sanitary. Just to note that there really wasn't any significant issues from a development or capacity point of view in terms of the sanitary system, which is the collection system and lagoon system. There was a check on the licensing and the permit capacities as well. No major issues. There certainly have some maintenance issues going on there, pump stations and those kinds of things, which again, typically are dealt with by the utility itself. In other words, the taxpayer who's paying for the utility costs through their rates. The advantage of development, of course, in terms of that, is as you get more development, you have more folks to contribute to those costs in the future. Okay, moving on to the water. This is one we've spent a lot more time looking at. The issues, John has done an excellent job of kind of going through the major issues there. The number one on my list was the reservoir storage. You really need 2 reservoirs. It's nice to have 2 from an operational point of view, but the real big issue there is you just don't have enough water in that reservoir to meet what the current fire flow or fire underwriter society standards are for fire protection for the bigger land uses. You're okay at single family. You're not okay for most of the other land uses that require higher fire flows. A note I would add to that, though, there are creative ways for a developer to deal with a situation where you've got lower fire flows. One of the good examples we like to give is you get a credit of 50% of your required fire flow if you put in sprinkler systems in your buildings, and that's often done on residential buildings where it doesn't have adequate fire protection. A residential sprinkler system has been known to reduce the amount of fire demands. It gets the fire out much quicker, and therefore you don't need the higher flows that you would need if you come in with a truck later into the event. So there's things like the size of the building, the type of construction, sprinklers. So there are some creative ways. So you might find a developer coming in an area that doesn't have enough fire protection, for example, as a commercial building, and they might be able to design the building in a way to match that existing fire flow. And hopefully in the future, that fire flow would get increased. The fix to that, as you know, is a big number. It's, $1 million, $2 million for a second reservoir. So it's not going to come quickly. I'm sure you're going to keep applying for grants until you're successful, but it may be that you may be looking at some other way to finance, and it could be a portion from development through a development cost charge bylaw or something like that, or you might get a huge developer coming in and actually agreeing to actually provide you that extra storage. The second item, and I'm not sure John mentioned it, I don't remember him in my passing here, but the other issue you've got is you've got lands in your community that are too high in elevation to be serviced with the existing system. When you reach a certain point, and I think, John, you calculated around 35 meters for one of the projects that you were involved in there, it reaches a point where you just don't have enough pressure to provide for service to any area above that. And what typically a municipality will do in those cases is establish a new pressure zone at a higher level, and you basically isolate the two zones using pump stations and pressure reducing valves. You end up having to bring your fire flows up into that new zone and store them in the upper zone. So you usually that triggers a requirement for some kind of storage. There have been communities that try to do that with fire pumps, but they're not particularly reliable. They typically don't work when you go to turn them on in the middle of the night when you really need them most. So most municipalities require that passive storage for those upper pressure zones. So you should be aware of that. There are a number of properties that are affected by this. The property at the north end of the community is affected by that. Western Forest has a large property in the center, closer into the village, and quite a large portion of that is also above that higher pressure zone as well. And you do have some triangular areas further to the south that are technically in the village boundaries, but are above the zone as well. So that is an emerging issue that you may have to deal with if and when development starts to creep over that line. There are different ways of dealing with it. You can require a big reservoir, $1 million, $2 million reservoir. A developer might offer to build a piece of it, or maybe a Bearland Strata might actually offer to build a little bit of infrastructure for their particular development. The downside of that is typically it's only sized for that one development, and you end up with all these separate systems that are all independently run, and they're typically owned by the development itself, not by the municipality. So that saves you the cost of maintenance. But I can tell you of examples where Bearland Strata corporations have kind of run out of the ability to maintain these things, and they often come back to the municipality and ask them to take them over. But that's perhaps a topic for another day. But it is an issue you need to be aware of, that you've got an area. It is, your OCP talks about it, and you do have areas that may be looking at rezoning up in those upper areas. You also have areas that are already zoned for development that are in those upper pressure zone boundaries. So on a rezoning application, I would deal with that servicing issue as an approving officer. On a rezoning application, you may get involved in that process. And then the significant one we've also talked about is this maximum day flow issue. There are lots of issues, as you've already identified. The log sort plays into this in a big way. Can we get the log sort off on a different system? We went and met with them some months ago and tried to see whether we could get them to use salt water on their logs. Unfortunately, they use this water for their equipment as well. Their hauling equipment to stop fires from the equipment itself. So salt water ain't going to work for them. Whether we could drill a well and get any capacity, it remains to be seen. But in the meantime, the log sort number, which we do have a meter on, but we can't record it on a continuous basis. And we really like to do that, so we know when the meter will tell us when those sprinklers go on and when they go off. If they leave them on for a weekend, we'll know it if we have the ability to record that. So that becomes part of that decision and recommendation that John made to do better documentation. So that involves the log sort and better recording and metering up at the treatment plant, which is the other end of the system. In the absence of that additional information, we're basically giving you a range of what we think your capacity remaining is. And it's our best guess, or your engineer's best guess, as to what that range is. But we can't tell for certain without that additional information. So I'm suggesting that should be one of your top priorities, is to get that information. We may find we've got more capacity than we think. We have a good news story there, and you can provide for more development than we're thinking. At this point, I'm tending to recommend a more conservative approach, the smaller number of the three that were given in that table of roughly 70 lots. And it's not 77, it's not 83, it's somewhere, between 50 and 100. We're just not that accurate. And if we were to start the metering program and the documentation, my suggestion would be, it would probably be okay for us to continue allowing development, limited development, as we get that better information. I think it would take a while to get an additional 50 lots here. So I think both John and myself have a comfort that the risk is not terribly great in allowing a little bit more, but we really do recommend that we spend that little bit of money, the 10 or 15,000, to get better documentation so you'll know what's going on. That'll also help us with our discussions with the log sort as well. As you may know, the log sort pays a substantial rate to your water utility, and that's already been done as an encouragement for them to think of other ways, but they're paying the rate. And so there'll be an implication if they end up going on their own, there'll be an implication from what I understand on your rates as well. So it kind of leads me to the other issues were the system pressure deficiencies and the higher velocities. That could be solved on a development by development basis. If we ask a developer to come in, they come in and they can't get fire flows, we would ask them to do a fire flow model, to run the model to see what the deficiency is. And we can't ask them to upgrade the 6-inch pipe to a 10 or whatever it would have to be to provide adequate fire protection. So we have some ability to get some upgrading done through the development process for those other two items. So that leads me to my recommendations, which are in your staff report, and I can speak further to them, but basically this is an exercise in risk and assessing risk. And we're doing our best to give you our assessment on what we think that risk is. And I think based on that, I think we feel comfortable with basically allowing a limited amount of additional residential development in terms of addressing that max day flow. If a development comes in and needs a higher fire flow, then they'll need to do whatever it takes to do that, either improving our infrastructure or modifying their development to fit within the available fire flows. So.
Well, thank you very much, John. Council, do you have any questions for John? No? I want to thank John and everybody else for their presentation. Extremely insightful and a little disappointing in terms of the money, but we'll have to work on that. Okay, thank you very much. So council receive the sewer and water capacity study staff report for information discussion, and that council instructs staff to examine options for funding water meters and recording work recommended in the water study to be more accurate, determine the current maximum day flows to facilitate future considerations and the impact of future development on the capacity of the water treatment system to provide maximum day flow, and the council instructs staff to continue the record daily flows at the treatment plant and the log sort until such time an automatic flow recording is in place. And respect for item 3C on the staff report, and that council consider allowing the development application to proceed to a limit of 77 residential lots, as an interim measure, such as additional flow records and data available, upon which matter can be reevaluated. And finally, that we recognize that that in terms of the subdivision approvals, which is solely within the preview of the approving officer, council wishes to advise the approving officer that on an interim basis, council would consider subdivision consistent with 77 lots, equivalent increase in density in the public interest. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll move that.
Second,
I will second that.
discussion. Councillor Tinsley?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only concern in this is the number of 77. I believe we have to be a little more conservative than that, based, and John mentioned it's a very general number. somewhere between 50 and 100. But with the factors, the change that's going on in the environment, combined with the fact that our current vacant lots aren't in that number. So per Councillor Burchett's point, we could add in, if there's 15 seasonal houses, we could add in 7. But then we need to take away the number of lots that are vacant that could be built on at any time. And I believe we also need to put in a buffer for basement suites. So that I believe we need to be a little more conservative. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
And your conservative number is
My conservative number would be 55.
CAO? Councillor Tinsley? Thank you.
Thank you. Just because we're doing the math here, and maybe I can ask John or Gabby to comment around the council is making a suggestion that there's there's built residences that aren't occupied totaling 15. Is that what I understand you're saying?
Thank you through the mayor. That was the figure that Councillor Brissett quoted, those relative to seasonal homes only.
Okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Sorensen or Gabby if they included those 15 homes in the calculation. My understanding is that they're existing homes, and I'm making the assumption they were included.
Okay, so I think the confusion here is, again, we did a model and we did all existing lots. And then we did a model and we did the existing plus the differences in the official community plan. But when we're talking about that 77 houses, that was, Tony gave us some numbers from what came out of the plant. We said, hey, you know, that one day was say 18 liters a second, 17.99. All I did, the plant makes 20, subtracted by 18, we got 2 liters per second. So no, it didn't. It's basically that 77 additional homes could be brought onto the system. That is what that number is saying. So they're, you know, then I guess you guys get to figure out where, if you want them to be brought on, where do you want them to come online?
Councillor Burchett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in those calculations for 77 homes were peak flow rates, correct? At almost 18 liters per second. So in my opinion, I'm fully on board with all 77 homes for improvement and growth.
CAO?
Mr. Manson, maybe for you to comment. So I'm considering a couple of things here. Well, for anybody to comment, including Mr. Sorensen. I'm considering a couple of things in the recommendation. So one, you are requesting to have the approval for up to 17 lot equivalent increase. But at the same time, we're also asking council to direct staff to research options or examine options for funding of the water metering. So we're looking, I mean, just for council's information, we're looking to come back to you fairly quickly with some options about how to fund that up to $15,000 rough number, up to $15,000, so we can get that water metering in place that would provide us more accurate data. John Manson, I'm just wondering, given that, like, if we come back to council fairly quickly, we get some water, I mean, the water metering has to occur over the summer anyway. So that's gonna, the water, if we could get that into place fairly quickly, that's the goal of staff. So that we could get water meter, so we could get some metering done during the summer of 2023. I'm just thinking, John, do you have any comments around Councillor Tinsley's suggestion for that number to be reduced in relation to the timing of the metering? Thank you.
Yeah, I think basically, and John said it as well, the calculations that have been done are are based on actual flows in the system. So whoever's living there, whoever's using water becomes part of the existing flows, including the log sort. So what we've determined is that there's a certain amount, there's a little bit left, there's 10% of your capacity left. And it is equivalent to roughly 77 new houses. Anything that increases your consumption should come out of that 77 in theory, right? So if you had a house that, or an empty lot and a house built on the lot, that's going to be an additional flow that, in theory, in our little calculation would come out of the 77. But I think the point I'm trying to reach is it's not 2 lots or 6. It's enough lots that I think you could probably got a year or two to work through this. And our feeling is in a year or two with this summer, and if necessary, we can't get it all together in time, we got to go another summer. By then, we should have better information. So about the time the theoretical number tells us we're at our limit, we should know better about what we're doing. And we may find that this was just bad information, and in actual fact, we've got more space, in which case we come back to council and let you know that's the case. Or if it got suddenly worse, we couldn't figure out, if it's a log sort or whatever. I think during this period of time, we'd also work on that whole log sort issue as well. And maybe that becomes the solution more than the number of residential lots, and that would free up the capacity. So it's a guideline for you to consider as you're doing. Hopefully that helps.
Hey, Councillor Gilkin. Oh, so you're pointing at the CEO? CEO?
Mr. Manson, to Councillor Tinsley's suggestion around the number of 55 lots, can you just speak to how that may or may not, I think we're doing a little bit of spitballing here based on some somewhat educated guessing. Can you perhaps speak to the impact, negative or otherwise, that reducing the number from 75 to 55, what the effect that would have on you in your role?
Yeah, I don't think it would be significant, and it's a good point. And you're giving yourself a bit of a buffer for the other types of approvals and things that you might have. That's not a bad way to go, because we don't have control over them. We would approve them, right? So unless you were going to literally put a stop on building permits, which is the next step up, right, in the scheme of things. But it wouldn't be unreasonable, and I'm not sure we'd be looking at 55 new lots coming on the system in any event. So I don't think that's a bad approach myself, but again, it's up to council to sort of decide what kind of risk. And by the way, let me just talk a little bit about the risk. What these are all theoretical calculations, as John noted. What we're trying to do is we're trying to keep that reservoir full at the end of every single day, including your maximum day flow, which in theory only occurs 1 day a year. And so what's the probability that you're going to have your fire happening on that exact 1 day? Well, it's not a big probability, except that typically this happens in the summer, hot days, and we do have a lot of fires in the summer, grass fires, et cetera. So we're just trying to follow the industry standard rules that says on that worst day of the year, your reservoir should be able to, your treatment plant should be able to fill the reservoir so it can start the next day full and you're not getting a deficit. So that's a little bit about the risk thing. I mean, you could have a small fire and your reservoir is only 2/3 full and nobody would know that there was enough water to go around. But we design these things so that you have your design fire flow at that bad day of the year. That's how it's all. That's how we do our calculations. We're conservative engineers, right? We don't want you running out of water at the wrong time.
CEO?
Thank you. So I would tend to support what Mr. Manson's saying, what Councillor Tinsley's suggesting. I think just for council to consider, if for some reason a developer wanted to come to town and had a magnificent proposal, we can always come back to council with an increase to the 55 or any other number that council determines and address such an increase at that time. So it'd be effectively, to John's point around risk, it'd be easier to manage risk with a lower number, knowing we can readdress it later, than a higher number that would effectively permit John to approve subdivision potentially beyond where you would want it to happen.
Okay. So council, let's look at the 77 to 55. Who's all comfortable with the 55? Sorry, Councillor Tinsley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, I ballpark that. If all I care about is the 77 figure minus the actual number of known vacant buildable lots that we have currently. That's the only fair way to do it. As John said, we have to give them a building permit. It's there, it's ready to go, it's a lot. So I would just suggest that the 77 be reduced by whatever I assume we know the actual number of vacant lots that are ready to go in the village. And we just take that number off that. That's the only way to do it. Otherwise you're telling people, as he said, you stop building permits then, which you can't do. They bought a lot that's a buildable lot. Okay, so you just take that number of lots, whether if it's 8, if it's 3, whatever it is. I just came up with 55. So I would just suggest it be revised to 77 minus the number of currently buildable lots that
So
are
we can
vacant.
add that into the final.
I would just suggest to be adjusted that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, sensible, but I'll leave it to the council vote. Thank you.
Does that make sense to council with that? We just have it at the 77? And then when the staff comes back with a number on what the buildable lots are, then we just reduce it from that. Councillor Burchett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've got a well-informed engineering report with max rates of flow, and they've permitted 77 roughly. So I don't see why we should be holding up development. We've got numbers, we've got a plan. If anything, we could have maybe better water conservation measures on a village scale that might help, with reduced water consumption. But I'm all for 77. I'm concerned that developers are not going to want to build here if we keep, holding up growth.
As it was mentioned earlier by the CAO and by Mr. Manson, is we wouldn't be holding up developers at that point. We'd be coming back to the table saying, this is where we are. Does council approve or not? CFO? CAO?
My only comment is with respect to the change to the 77, which is, I believe you have a motion and a seconder, is that if you wanted to make a friendly amendment to that, you could suggest that staff will reduce the number from 77, less the number of vacant lots, and we can do that as an administrative detail afterwards, and that would become the number.
Okay. CFO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, and the other option, of course, would be to take a vote on the motion that's on the table and then move forward from there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion that's on the table, which is consistent with the 77 lot equivalent increase in density and public interest. So that was the, we did the motion, we did the second, we did the discussion. All in favor? Correct. Okay, opposed? Okay. Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate all your time. Thank you. Mr. Manson, did you have more to add? Oh, your volume.
Am I excused?
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much for being there.
Thanks, council.
And thanks to McElhinney staff for being here as well. Thank you. Okay, land exchange agreement extension. That council received the land exchange agreement extension to staff reports for information and discussion, and that the land exchange agreement amendment be approved, and that the mayor and the corporate officer be authorized to execute the agreement. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Sayward Clinic renewal lease. The council received the Sayward Clinic renewal lease staff report for information and discussion, and that the renewal lease between the village and the valley, the village of Sayward and the Sayward Community Health Society be approved, and that the mayor and the chief financial officer be authorized to execute the agreement. Motion, please.
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Permissive tax exemption for 2024. That council received the permissive tax exemption 2024 staff report for information and discussion. And that staff be directed to advertise the tax exemption process as outlined in this report. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? Councillor Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question about the process and the application for the tax exemption. And that question is, when do the applications come before council to be considered after August 1st?
CFO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Paulson. It's in the schedule there, September 5th. Schedule on page 211 of the staff report. So it would be September 5th that report would come back to council with any applications received and recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Burchett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to either amend the motion or add a separate motion to the tax exemption, and that's for a staff report for the extension of Kelly's Trail to Sayward Road and possible parking. And this would be a great time to negotiate this with Nature Trust.
Councillor Tinsley?
Just point of order through the mayor. I think we're just focusing on people being able to apply for the exemption. So
Correct. We're not
certainly
getting into the meat.
the organizations, if there's any other organizations, they can bring forward in this process through the public notice.
That's correct. At that time will be the opportunity to address what kind of things, what kind of asks that we have. Okay,
Thank you.
all in favor? Opposed? See none, motion's carried. Late item staff report F is the UBCM Complete Communities Program, CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can well, I'm not sure if you'd like time to read it or if you'd like me perhaps just to give you the Coles notes of this.
Synopsis is fine.
I'm seeing lots
For
of
me.
nodding heads.
Good for you guys.
Okay, so we just recently learned of this UBCM Complete Communities Program. So Cole's notes of this is that it's 100% grant. No village funds would be required. It's through UBCM. We had good success with our UBCM applications. The application is due in 10 days. It's got a quick turnaround. The proposed project for this is a zoning bylaw scoping study. And so effectively speaking with our contact at Urban Systems, effectively a zoning bylaw scoping study, which is an eligible project for this, would not be a rezoning or not have our zoning bylaw redone completely, but it would be a scoping study, which would basically bring us right to the finish line. So zoning bylaw, or pardon me, rewriting of zoning bylaws typically aren't funded because they're considered to be a mandatory or a requirement of local governments. But this zoning bylaw scoping study will get us right to the finish line, and it will basically provide staff with the ability to turn that into a zoning bylaw. The cost of that project is estimated to be upwards of $50,000. So the village would effectively want to make application for $50,000 for that project. We have spoken with our contact at Urban Systems. You'll see in the very last paragraph, just below phase 3 on page 2, I quote the fee of up to $1,200, and that's correct. The number you see down below in the recommendations is an error. There's an extra 0 in there. It's $12,000. So the recommendation in this report is for council to approve, is to direct staff to consult in Urban Systems to write the grant for the fee of $1,200, and the rest of the recommendations are there for you. But from staff's perspective, this is a low risk, high reward proposal, and we encourage you to consider it.
Thank you. So the recommended resolution is that council receive the UBCM Complete Communities Program staff report for information discussion, and the council direct staff to contract, Urban Systems to complete the application for up to $1,200. And that staff is directed to submit the application to UBCM. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Thank you. Second,
I will second that.
discussion? Councillor Paulson?
I did have a question about the rezoning of the subdivision, of the proposed subdivision as part of the official community plan, which was the information we were given when we began the OCP was that we needed the OCP to be updated so that the zoning bylaw at the proposed Adama could be advertised and changed. Was that in the price of that included in, or the rezoning included in the finalizing of the OCP plan?
CAO?
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Paulson, no, this has nothing to do with individual subdivision applications. This is in relation to the village's zoning bylaw, the bylaw that we use to assess subdivision applications. Yes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Number 13, Emergency Services, Public Works, Recreation Department Report. Councillor Tinsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think everyone's read the report. It's pretty straightforward. Looking for 1 or 2 people willing to be a contact for the Coast Guard or other bodies if there's an emergency in our area, with the connection being through the SRD, wanting to connect smaller communities so that in those types of emergencies, there's a contact person available. The key thing to note in it, obviously, is that this is someone who's prepared to monitor their email 24/7, which means 24/7. It's all 24/7 because that's the only way they send it out, by email. And so looking for, well, at least 1 and ideally 2. From my position, I'll defer to anyone who wants to do it.
That does not include you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd prefer if someone else would like to do it. I'd rather not. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So we got 2 positions filled. It's got to be somebody who's going to be monitoring their emails 24/7 and in the area. Councillor Burchett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I definitely would like to volunteer for that. It's right up my alley, considering I'm semi-retired Royal Canadian Marine Search and Rescue Technician. I spend a lot of time on the water. I have family and senior positions in Coast Guard already, and I'm already in the loop on marine emergencies that are going on or active.
Right, anybody else? Councillor Tinsley,
In reconsideration, I guess as being the EPC, I have to, so I will. And I will do my best to monitor 24/7. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Paulson,
It seems to me that it was incredible the way the local spill happened shortly after we were at AVICC, and some of the presenters at the trade show were there, and I talked to them at length because we didn't have any we were waiting for that big thing to happen on the water. And I think that Councillor Burchett talked at length to the people there, and it was just incredible the way it unfolded when he had discussed the situation in Sayward, and it's almost like the marine section is separate from the like the emergency. There's land emergency response and there's water emergency response. And I would recommend that he also be considered to attend to that position.
Councillor
Point of
Tinsley,
order, the subject here is just having two people available for contact through the SRD's contacts, the same as
Yes.
other village. That's what we're voting on here. Thank you.
yeah, and we just have to make sure when the two individuals that are on this list, make sure that they communicate through the proper channels as well when there's an incident. Okay, so we have the council received the SRD Emergency Support Team Volunteer Opportunity Staff Report for information and discussion, and that council appoint Councillor Tinsley and Councillor Burchett as the village volunteer representative for the SRD Emergency Support Team as described herein. Motion, please.
Move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion is carried. Okay, that the recommended resolution is that the nuisance bylaw 502/2023 be given fourth and final reading. Do we have a motion, please?
I will move that.
Second,
I'll second it.
discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. New business? None. Public question period. Anybody online? No, so I'm not going to go through that. The in-camera portion of the program, thank you. That in accordance with section 92 of the community charter, this council meeting will be closed to the public at this time in order that council give consideration to the following matter in accordance with the following section of the community's charter, 90-1N. The consideration of whether council meetings should be closed under this provision of the section or subsection 2. Motion, please.
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion. All in favor? Motion is carried. I need an adjournment, please. Adjournment. Recommendation for adjournment.
I'll adjourn the meeting, or I'll motion that.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion. All in favor? Opposed? The meeting is adjourned.